Well, good afternoon. I have to say, a friend called and asked if I would do this panel. Sure, whatever's helpful, sounds good. Then I saw who the panelists were. And I'm thinking, well, now this is a combination I would have never seen in my entire life. We got the CEO of Herbalife. We got a major restaurateur, if I may say. We have the former head of Supreme, I just lost it. I can't believe I just lost it, of SHAPE.
NATO.
So, of NATO, basically. I do know these acronyms, but I'm having a senior moment, as they say. And a former Navy Admiral. What in the world could we come up with that would make sense for these? How do we connect this group of people? And then I realized what it really was. And it goes to something you just told me seconds ago. We're talking about leadership. We're talking about human capital. You worked for Shackley when you were a kid. And you want a Cadillac at 21 years old. So tell us where you are now, and then tell us what that Cadillac at 21 years old taught you.
First off, you were what he does, and you really didn't work for him, but you were an independent contractor, and it was direct sales. But I took it to another level. I opened up stores, and at 21, you know, if you sold X amount, you got a Cadillac. Now today, see, I still drive a Cadillac. I have an Escalade, but so I haven't really improved that much. So except I think I was doing probably $1 million in business then, and today I'm doing $3.5 billion with, of course, all the Landry's restaurants. There's about 60 brands and the Golden Nugget casinos and a bunch of hotels. So it's been a great ride. It's been a long ride, but life is good. And one thing I understand is employees is having 60,000 of them. And that's what it takes to operate. And finding leadership and finding the next level of leadership. I've got 25 VPs that have been with me 20 years or more. And so I'm going to make it, but I don't know if my kids are going to make it. They better find some good leadership. So.
Well, the reason I was going to this story about the Cadillac is because you said it taught you how to talk to people. But I was also going to that story because it's the idea of identifying leaders at a very young age. So when you were back with Shackley, you were quite young, you did quite well. You're now the CEO of Landry's. You run all these these restaurant chains. You've got to worry about the highest levels of leadership. But in fact, you have something in common with our military leaders here. And that's you need to identify a whole core of very young workers. You need to find workers who are going to thrive in this organization, who are going to be responsible, deliver the sort of service you're looking for. How do you find, let's start at that level, the operator level.
Well, if you start at the operator level, and I assume you're talking about running a store, it's hard. I mean, number one, we do talk about the millennials not being the same today. We do have a different generation, and we always think the generation below us is difficult. They're so smart and they're so ambitious in a great way because they all want to be millionaires, you know, 2 years out of college, but they don't want to work weekends, they don't want to work nights, and they're sure not going to work holidays. So, but other than that, they're great. I think they're probably smarter than we were. I do think that. But it's a different workforce today. I would assume in the military it would be interesting. I haven't really talked to anybody in the military about it, but what is the young soldier? You want me to take over this? What is the young soldier like today?
Well, that's exactly, frankly, where I was going with this, because we have the former Supreme Allied Commander, I could eventually remember this. We have the former head of all naval aviation. So you're at the highest levels here, but you also have to think about the force as a whole. How do you find those people that serve on ships? How do you find those people that will serve in the platoons? How do you approach that kind of massive, very young workforce? And Wes, you want to start it?
Sure. I mean, well, we went to a volunteer force. So when I came in, and I think you did too, we had a draft. And that was a big transition for us. So we had to do marketing. We didn't have to quite market that way before. When you had a draft, the Navy was mostly volunteer anyway because people wanted to get out of being drafted into the into the Army, so they volunteered for the Navy and the Air Force. So it was always the Army that had the conscripts in it. So we marketed a little bit, but then we had to really use something that you'd call today, you'd call it Salesforce.com. And we set up a recruiting command that really did track appointments and teach people how to sell and put budgets out there and work it. We had to figure out what quality level we needed. So we decided we wanted to focus the enlisted force. We wanted high school graduates. That's not easy. And if you have to have a high school graduate and he has to be medically and physically fit, the majority of the American public that's 18 doesn't qualify, actually. So that narrows your recruiting base, so you've got to have incentives. So we're running on incentives, and the incentives are monetary, they're social, and they're cultural. So we get some single soldiers who come in, they're highly motivated, they want to be doing something for their country. Maybe they've got family connections. We've got young soldiers who are married, who want medical care and housing. They realize they can't do it on the outside, on the average paycheck, and they think the Army's a good way of life. Normally they've tried it. They've been in service stations, they've been in fast foods, they've done the things that high school graduates can do, but they haven't gotten the traction. And we've got some that come in out of college that just want to come in, and maybe they go to OCS.
Which is Officer Candidate School.
But we've perfected this. We know what we're doing. We know what we have to provide in the way of enlistment bonuses to bring people in, and we know how to do the re-enlistment bonuses to keep the 70% in beyond the first 3-year enlistment term. So we've really worked this very, very scientifically over the last 40 years to bring this force together. And I just want to say this because in the civilian side, you were mentioning about working nights and weekends. Our people, when they come in, they want privacy. They like to have their own rooms. They like their stereos and their cell phones and their social media, just like everybody does. But the thing is, they don't have it, not when they start out. And we bring them into a culture where they will work nights and weekends, and they will believe in each other, and they'll be part of a team, and they'll recognize they're working for something more than themselves. They'll accept the financial incentives, but in the Army, for example, if you, just to give you an example, in business you'd be looking at a flat organization. So how many VPs do you have to have? Does every one of them have to have a secretary and an assistant? And you try to run the cost out of the organization. In the Army, we actually structure the organization so that at each level for an officer, there's something he can do as a leader. There's a command. So if you're a captain, you're commanding a company. If you're a lieutenant colonel, you're commanding a battalion. If you're a colonel, you're commanding a brigade. At one point in the Army, we got rid of the colonel level command, and one of the reasons we put it back in is because we need it. We need it because that's the way we bring our people up. For the officers, we're an up or out system. We're a one strike and you're out. Once you make a mistake and it's down in writing, it's just, okay, lieutenants make lieutenant mistakes. Generals make general mistakes, but you make a big one and it's down in writing, please leave. We do have, retention boards where we screen reports and people are asked to leave, but most people understand. I mean, we're taking the best of the best and we're bringing them all the way up through the system. And at each level, it's competitive. You're evaluated by the person that you're working for, and you're evaluated by his or her boss. So it's a pretty tough system, and it does produce great talent. It also washes out a lot of people who can go elsewhere and do great things. People that don't make general, people that don't make full colonel, still tremendous talent that these people can bring out into the civilian economy. So you can't look at it as a failure. You just have to look at it as a system that's just at every level. We called it the stations of the cross, because at every level you're picking the very best to advance to the next level.
I want to pick up on something you said here, Wes. Okay, and I will stop you, I guess, but I was really just wanted to pick up a point you made early on, which is this idea of developing a culture, of inculcating the organizational culture into these new recruits. Dave, is there something the Navy does when it's advertising, when it's recruiting, that helps some self-selection process, that actually helps identify people who might thrive?
Yeah, so that's a that's a great question. We talked earlier before we came in about companies and organizations that are really good at branding themselves. The Marines come immediately to mind in the military. They're just fantastic at it. All you have to do is walk by a billboard that shows the Marine Corps sword called the Marmaluke, and it says earned, never given. And you say, where do I sign up? I want to be part of an organization and a culture that is just like that. Yeah. The challenges that I saw earlier in my career, and I'm about 2 years now retired from my active duty service and now in the private sector, but some of the challenges that I saw early on in my career with some of the recruiting challenges that we had, bring the workforce in, evaporated somewhat after 9/11. And this ties back, I think, to a comment that Tilman made regarding the millennials, because what I noticed in my last 14 or 15 years on active duty was that there was a real sense of purpose in this young generation. I had the opportunity about 12 years or so ago to be the captain of a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier, 6,000 people, pretty good-sized organization, very complex organization. And the average age in that crew of 6,000 was about 20 to 20 and a half years old. So these are young folks who are right out of high school for the most part. They've had a little bit of formal training, and then they come for the rest of their training and indoctrination as part of my crew. And the amazing thing in those young men and women is that all the things that strike a chord, and by and large they were millennials, the thing that struck a chord with that population, teamwork, sense of purpose, sense of belonging to something, may not do it forever, but at least for this portion of your life, you're invested in something that's bigger than yourself. And it sounds like a trite phrase, but it's really not. All those attributes were present in my crew. And so I would have captains of industry come out and visit me, and they'd watch flight operations, and they'd go and talk to the crew for a few hours, and they'd come back up to the bridge and they'd say, Captain, how do you get your organization aligned like this, horizontally, vertically? I've never seen anything like it. And I said, well, you know, truth in advertising, I've got a captive audience. Everybody's within 1,000 feet of me. I have instant communication because I can get on the ship's announcing system and align them and talk about what our operations are, and so you get everybody on board. But more importantly, they see themselves as part of a bigger team, and they know exactly where they fit in that team. And so this is a very interesting shift that I've seen. You know, people talk to me about the young generation. I say, well, you know, I've worked with them every day in the military, and actually, if you keep them focused and you give them a sense of purpose, they do a pretty darn good job for you.
Well, all right. We've talked about the millennials a bit. You brought it up as well, Tilman. Michael, I want to turn to another characteristic of the contemporary workforce. And if I may say, so you're the chairman and CEO of Herbalife. Herbalife's been around how long?
Since 1980, 37 years.
37 years. And I'm willing to say that Herbalife was cool before any of these organizations, and that you got the gig economy a long time ago. Can you talk about this idea of the gig economy and how you've actually built your business on it?
Well, you gave me that question earlier, so I called my assistant and had him look up gig economy for the actual definition of what gig economy meant, because I wasn't sure I was familiar with what gig economy, and according to the definition on the internet, of course everything's right on the internet, it's a temporary workforce. I don't like to look at our company as a temporary workforce. Okay. We have two economies, if you will. We have a corporate economy and a corporate workforce with about 8,500 people, and then we have hundreds of thousands of distributors in 90 markets, 94 markets throughout the world. Those people, and I'm jealous that you could get on a mic and talk to all your employees at once. We can't do that. They're 24/7, and they work on a pure meritocracy. They sell a product, they make money. They get a Cadillac maybe. And that is an incredible organization that's mission driven. They're driven for two things. One is to supply their family with an income and take care of them, maybe a better education, maybe a better car or home or something along that line. but also they're driven to a mission around health and nutrition, which we really work on in the company very hard to put them in a bigger purpose, very much, I would say, like the military. Give them a bigger purpose and a bigger feeling. Our employees, I hope, feel the same way, that they are part of a bigger mission. We've been through a very interesting time in the company over the last 5 years, had an enormously wrong-minded agitator come at us, and you have to worry about morale, and you have to worry about how people are going to respond to that. And so whether it's the gig economy, whether it's a millennial or not, you have to keep that mission out there in front of them to make them feel and really believe yourself that you're part of a bigger purpose, improve people's lives, give people an opportunity to earn a little extra income or have a full-time living. Make sure that your integrity is right there. Make sure that teamwork makes the dream work in your company, that you really work together to build something that's extraordinary and spectacular and give people a special sense of purpose in the company. And so whether it's a gig economy, whether people, according to the definition on the internet, that just meant part-time. So a gig economy means that somebody's an Uber driver and an Herbalife distributor and a Shackley distributor all at once. Our distributors tend not to have multiple jobs. They tend to be much more focused on our company, especially as they rise up in the ranks and they don't have other incomes from other things. Their husband or wife may have, and they may have it in their household, but our distributors tend to be pretty much dedicated to our purpose. So, and employees, they're not part of the gig economy. We have full-time employees. We expect them there full-time. They do work really hard in our company, maybe weekends every now and then, and hope not too many holidays, but we're a hard-working crew of people. I hope that answered your question.
That's terrific. And gig economy, I was thinking as much about the temporary and the flexible nature of that workforce.
Well, that is, if you're a lower level distributor, definitely. If you're in it part time, just to make a few extra bucks and sell some products and to improve your own health, and you may sell it to a friend or a family, you may lose 20, 30 pounds, and somebody says, "Gee, what happened to you?" And then they'll take that product and say, "Hey, this is what I did. I got on a program and it worked for me." That's a gig economy person for us.
All right, Tilman, I want to move us to, we've talked about sort of the operator level, the people coming into the organizations from the ground level. But let's talk for a minute about how you build an extraordinary corporation, the number of businesses that you have, the number of business lines, chains, et cetera. How do you establish, or first of all, what is the overall culture of Landry? Is there something that would define that, that binds all of it together?
Well, number one, there are no spare customers, and number two, we try to always be the bull. And when times are tough, we're a cyclical player. And when other companies are struggling in tough times, that's when we feast on other people and take them over. But it's an interesting culture in the sense that we've never hired executives from the outside. Everybody is homegrown. Have we picked up different people that have filled VP positions that we've acquired? Yes, but we usually cut the head off at the top, and we keep all the operators. We've never kept a CEO of a particular company we've bought. We've brought everybody to Houston, Texas, and they all office out of one huge corporate office. And you grow people from within, and that's how you build a strong culture, and you get it passed down. Is it great to bring in, like I said, people sometimes from other companies, and they were the best person available? Absolutely. You do what's always best for the company. But we've done better growing from within, and different companies do different things, but that's what's worked best for us, and that's why we have such a strong culture. And I think what we do real well today is that we've all been together a long, long time.
Well, so then we have found yet one more connection with your military brethren, which they seem to have segregated the group this way. But this idea of hiring from within, promoting from within.
It's really interesting because many times I'll be writing and I'll be sitting there talking to my pilots, and we hire a lot of military pilots, and I'll ask them, what made you get out or whatever, and it's funny how you were defining it, how it just keeps getting smaller and smaller, and you just get pushed out. There's so many people vying for that next rank.
It's true, but it's
worse than.
But pilots are funny people because a lot of them.
Oh, here we go.
A lot of them, they just want to fly. So
And they don't want to be leaders.
What happens is in the services, you get promoted up and you get pushed out of flying jobs. And sometimes in the Air Force, and we've got an Air Force officer up here, he'll probably testify to this, and maybe the Navy is the same, but they change type of aircraft. And if you were an A7 pilot and you're not, for whatever reason, because you just commanded a squadron, or whatever, they don't qualify you for the F-18. And so you're not going to fly again.
Okay.
And then you're not going to command if you have to be an aviator to command. So things happen. And in the Army, we've got a lot of people that fly helicopters, and they love it. And that's what they want to do. So when you promote them up, they're going to get out.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And it is, and a lot of times it is the helicopter pilot
Yeah.
besides the...
And I mean, it's no reflection that it's not that they wouldn't have been promoted. They pick what they want to do.
And they'd rather get out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, then let's go back to this system that keeps moving, keeps narrowing, narrowing the pyramid. We keep moving up the pyramid. You get pushed out. It's time for you to leave.
Yeah.
So that means you've got a set of criteria for deciding who the next leader should be. Theoretically, it's about the potential to lead, not what you've accomplished before, but they actually go hand in hand. Talk a little bit about, Dave, I'll ask you to talk about the criteria you use. When does it work great, and are there types of people that it just misses?
So I'll start the answer by saying this. I am still very much in transition. Retired from a 36-year military career just 2 years ago, and I'm now 2 years into my journey in the private sector. Still learning my way as I go, but I'm finding some remarkable similarities. And the kind of organization I think that Tilman just described within Landry's is in many ways very similar to the military in terms of a pyramid. You've got a pretty broad base, and then as you matriculate through the organization, there are fewer spots, but you need fewer people, and you want to make sure that you keep promoting your talent. Within the military, we've actually got I think, across all the services, a pretty good system in place, because we start out with building foundational skills. You really cut your teeth in your first few assignments based on the operational expertise that you're expected to gain, no matter what community you happen to be a part of. And that's how you get known, that's how you become a part of the culture, that's how seniors recognize what your talent is. And then as you're given leadership opportunities along the way to command a platoon or a squad or a company or a squadron in my case, then you have the opportunity now to really get your hands dirty in real leadership challenges. And just like in the private sector, the organizations get larger and larger, and if you show your skills so that you can continue to move up through the organization and deal with more complex challenges, more difficult challenges in larger and more far-flung organizations, then that's recognized as well. We have formal promotion boards. We have formal fitness reports and performance appraisals that help guide those boards in the selection of folks at various levels through promotion. The one thing I would note, and I experienced this myself in my own military career, there becomes this interesting inflection point as you move up through the organization, where the selection for the next promotion isn't necessarily predicated on what you did, but what you can do in the future. And I had a couple of very senior mentors that pulled me aside, put me on their knee, and they said, so Dave, you are now at that point in your career where it doesn't matter what you did in the past, but what skills do you have to help us deal with these complex challenges of the future? And I think that's the same in the business world as well.
It is.
Now, one of the differences, if I can jump in here, is I think because of the military lifestyle, because of the moves, the deployments, and other things, people, they sometimes drop out of this race to the top for personal reasons. So you have children who are sick, you have a wife who says, I'm just not moving again, and you have to make those kinds of decisions along the way. So we lose a lot of good talent that way in the military. It's just, it's not a life for everyone.
Right. So I want to Picking up, so the military, throughout its history, has been terrific about pushing decision-making down to the lowest possible level. The platoon commander, the ship captain. You have to be the A-team leader. You have to be able to lead far removed from the hierarchy. It's changed quite a bit with changing communications, et cetera. But Michael, I understand that this idea of pushing decision-making down to the lowest level is something that's you've really emphasized at Herbalife.
Well, we have a philosophy, or I have a philosophy in the company, that the smartest person in the room is the room. You know, if you think you're the, you know, if you always think you've got all the suggestions and all the ideas in the room, and that person sticks out, right?
Yeah.
You know, we've all been in the room with that person, and we try to have a very consultative management style in our company. If we've got a problem, and we've faced a lot of issues in the company, and we put a product in people's body, we have a distribution and sales system that's out in 90 markets or 90 some odd markets that it lives up to a scrutiny, and we have a lot of folks focusing on us, and so the problems are never far away from the door. And so when we have one, we throw it on the middle of the table, and we let everybody chime in on it and what should be done. And we find that's the absolute best way to get things done. We're not as hierarchical as the military until we implement. And then when we implement and we take a decision, we want to make sure, you know, like the generals would tell you and the Admiral would tell you, any battle plan is great until the first bullet's fired. And so what we want to do is be able to be reflexive enough to change, but we also want to be open enough to bring all the ideas into the room and then move forward. I've never been the smartest guy in the room. I'm just a farm kid from Michigan, and stuff. And I like to learn from other people. And we want to digest our ideas as strongly and effectively as we can, as far down into the organization as we can. There's no president or vice president of good ideas. When you're implementing, then you got to have a structure in an organization. When you're creating, let's get all the ideas on the table.
Well, Tilman, this idea of pushing decision-making down to the lowest possible level, you have a whole series of restaurant chains and stores and all that. They are operating literally on the street level. How do you push those decisions down, but how do you try to get alignment between the organizations?
Well, you got to have systems, and I think what we do really well is systems, but it still comes down to, if it's a general manager running a restaurant that does $5 million in revenue and makes $1 million and has 120 employees, or a casino that has 3,000 employees that does $250 million and makes $75 million, you're dependent on that person to use common sense every day. Because we're dealing with over 100 million customers a year, and you deal with so many issues, from product to employee issues to customer issues, that you've got to have people on the ground in their boots that are making good decisions. And so you have a lot of leaders. You've got almost 600 properties that there is a person responsible for the daily operation. And you can have a book and a system for everything, but if you don't have the person that uses just good common sense judgment every day, all day, you're going to disappoint the customer, you're going to disappoint your employees, and they're going to disappoint the corporate office, and that's just the way it is.
Yeah, think United Airlines. No, I mean, if they had pushed that decision on that customer down to the lowest level, to allow people, we have, like I said, we have business in 90 plus markets. We have to rely on those general managers in those markets to have that common sense, to make those decisions intellectually and intelligently, but we also have to put the common sense in them to know when to push that decision up too. Are they going to make a decision that's going to impact the whole corporation, around? We sign a distributor up at 10 o'clock in the morning. They're speaking on our behalf at noon that day. We want to make sure that person is trained, they're saying the right thing, that there is a structure in order to it, but that general manager in that marketplace has enough common sense to be not only our compliance officer, our marketing officer, our sales officer, but is making sure that the command and control at that level is taking responsibility for the company and for that margin that you're talking about.
But then you got to have the right system, and that's where your linen cost should be 0.3%, and your beverage cost is this percent, or your hold and blackjack should be 16.2%, roulette 24%. So it's still the system that keeps everybody in line. but you're totally dependent on the people on the ground making good decisions.
And if I could just add maybe two thoughts to this. One would be, and what you both just described is what in the military we would call commander's intent. You have to have very clear guidance from the top of the organization in terms of what the expectations are, what the roles and responsibilities and authorities are at different levels, and then you empower your people to go execute, and this gets into the human capital side. And then the other thing that you need, I would suggest, is a very good, unobstructed internal communication system, both up and down and back and forth, so that you can raise issues very quickly, they can come to the right level for resolution, information is not filtered, and again, that takes a very special type of leader at each one of the levels of the organization to make that work properly.
So do you find, David, sorry I'm not trying to be the moderator, but do you find in the military, because when you're hit with a problem in an issue, what I've found, especially in the last 10 years, is there's always an emotional reaction first, and then you have to slow that down a little bit, and sometimes, because I'm a hugely passionate human being, sometimes it's me having the emotional reaction. Everybody's got to calm me down a little bit, and then it's fact gathering, and then it's solution orientation, you know, but do you find that in the military too? Is there an emotional reaction to things? I mean,
Absolutely.
because I always think of the military as being by the book and being very, you know,
Absolutely.
you want to pull out a gun and shoot someone, right?
You got people, you know, under fire. You got people in danger. You
Right.
got people bleeding on the ground. So it's all emotion first.
Yeah.
But one of the things we always go by is we know that the first report is always wrong.
Always wrong.
Always wrong. It's never right. So you have to, before you make a decision, you have to get all the facts out there. And you do have to try to take the emotion out of it. The best commanders and the best leaders are those who don't betray emotion. The energy has to come from the situation itself. What you're looking for is the guy that's totally ice cold on the mic, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, you don't want any hot emotions on that, you know, they're on your tail, look out! You know, that's the wrong
So you don't want any heroes in the foxhole with you.
That's not what you're looking for. But one of the things about pushing it, decisions down that I found, and Dave, I don't know if you've been in this situation or not, but at certain levels you get into, it turns out that tactical decisions have strategic consequences. And so what could be done in one circumstance by a sergeant, now you can't let the sergeant do that. And sometimes you can't let the general do that because it has such enormous consequences. And you can't always foresee it, despite what the commander's intent is. So you have to have a lot of give and take in the chain of command, and people have to understand that some little things carry big impact. One year we were in Bosnia, we seized a radio telephone tower by accident that belonged to the Serbs. It's a peacekeeping force. And so the Serbs came and very respectfully said, we'd like you to give this back. And then when we didn't give it back right away, the next level in the Serb command said, this is very important. And then I got a call from the president saying, you've taken my tower, I must have this back. So at that point I knew we'd gotten something that was really valuable.
Yep.
But what had happened is 2 levels below me, they were getting ready to give it back because they didn't understand the political significance of it. And the local people, the newspapers and all the rest of the people were saying, NATO's going to give this back. They're no better than the United Nations. They're feckless. When pressed, they won't stand up for themselves. So we had this little do-si-do between the 2-star, the 4-star, and me as to what was going to happen there. And so you realize there are real limits in these situations, and especially when you look at, Tom Ricks wrote a book about 4 or 5 years ago criticizing the general officers and saying that not enough were fired in Iraq and Afghanistan. A lot of people took that book to heart, and I don't know how the majors and captains would feel about it, but I read the book and I looked at it, and what I saw wasn't the failure of general officers. What I saw was the failure at the political interface, where you had contractors that didn't work for the generals, they worked for the Pentagon, or they worked for the State Department. And you had diplomats that went their own way. And the result was, at least from my reading of it in Iraq and Afghanistan is it wasn't a team. It didn't come together the right way. And so it's easy to want to fire a general or colonel or captain when the troops don't do what the troops are supposed to do. But when you want to fire them because the mission doesn't get accomplished and it's well above military, it's political, military, legal, and diplomatic, you're firing the wrong person. You have to go way up the chain of command to above the general to find out who's responsible in that case. So we have to keep that in mind when we're judging people's performances.
Well,
All right, wait. General, we're not letting you off the hook. We want to know about the tower, what happened?
good point.
Okay, so, I mean, the truth is, we didn't give it back.
Because
We held it, and the guy was, he was really unhappy about it. We took away his authority to negotiate. I had an officer who came to me and said, I've given my word. They asked me to give my word as a general. I said, you gave your word as a general to a Serb war criminal. So I don't think it matters very much, so we're not giving it to him, okay? And we had a little set to, and people started making phone calls, and the Secretary of Defense got involved and so forth. We did not give the tower back until we'd made our point and extracted all the political goodies from the possession of the tower.
Did you give it back intact?
Yeah, no, I mean, you have to, what we had was a play, you know. We'll give you this, but you're going to give us that.
Little horse trade.
And so it was a question of who got to say what was what. But I found in 3 or 4 cases in my command that you had problems with people assume that they have the authority to make these decisions, and they don't realize the political stuff behind it. So they don't have that authority. And you have to get really tight up at the top level.
And how do you train that? How do you train someone where their authority lies in a political environment?
Well, it's the hardest thing about what we've asked our Army to do, and the other services, but especially the Army, because the Army's on the ground dealing with these leaders. So if you take Dave Petraeus' position in Iraq, for example, he was dealing with the head of a government, he was dealing with the Pentagon, the State Department, foreign policy, and he didn't have control over all of that. He knew that. And the people that were working for him, he tried to give them good guidance. Sometimes they did the right things, sometimes they didn't. And you just have to go through an education and training process. We start that at the Command and General Staff College level. So when they're captains or majors, they start looking at the broad aspects of how is national security policy determined. And then they go through another level of schooling we call it the War College level. When they're mid-career, they're like late 30s, early 40s. They have to study history, diplomacy, national strategy. They have to learn to be sensitive to these larger issues. And then hopefully, before they go into the situation, they really understand the big picture of what they're going into, because you can't just go in and sort of give orders, attack, defend, delay, because it's not that. If it were World War II, you could do that. If it were the Korean War, you could do that. In Vietnam, you could not do it. You cannot do it in Afghanistan or Iraq today or any of the other things we're doing. So there's a military repertoire, but it has to fit within the larger panorama and objective of what you're trying to do. It's a tough thing to communicate.
Yeah.
And it's been one of our real problems.
So I want to pick up on this point that you're making here about a formal system for identifying and nurturing leaders by providing, as in the case of the Army, as the officers get more senior, they get a wider view, they start looking at some of the political aspects, et cetera. The military is designed as a system to do exactly that, identify potential leaders and nurture them. What I'd like to do is ask Dave and then ask Tilman, what are the informal mechanisms you use for identifying and nurturing leaders? Because some of it's done through the formal system, but quite a bit is done informally as well.
Yeah, so that's another terrific question, and if I could, I'm just going to circle back on one thing that General Clark said as a point of emphasis, and this is an interesting differentiation perhaps that I'm discovering between my life in uniform for nearly 4 decades and what I've discovered just in the short period of time I've been in the private sector. So Wes described a system where we educate at every level. We make investments in formal training, and the training gets more complex as the expectations and the roles and responsibilities for the more senior non-commissioned officers and officers as you move up the food chain. I was a little bit surprised, and perhaps the company that I'm running now down in San Diego is unique in this regard. We used to, at one point in time, we had a formal training program for our folks, and it went beyond entry-level training. What I have discovered is that we rely almost exclusively on-the-job training now. So for a program manager or a program director or a vice president that matriculates up through the organization, there's really no refresh on the formal training that I'm used to from the military. That's an interesting sidelight. And again, it may be unique to the circumstance I find myself in now, or it may be more pervasive, I don't know.
Well, actually, let me go ahead and pick up on that because
I didn't answer your question, by the way.
Well, that's right. I'll come back to that question because it wasn't a bad one. But let me pick up on that same thing.
I think she's done with you.
No, how much formal training are you all doing? And you have major global corporations. How much formal training do you do as people move up through the organization?
Well, I mean, to work at the corporate office, everybody has to have a college degree, and then you go through a training program, and depending on what division you're in, whether you're an operator or if you're in HR. But the biggest thing about hiring people is, and I tell people this all the time when I talk to them, is it's easy to stick out. If you want to grow and you want to move up the chain and be a leader, nothing goes unnoticed. Everybody notices what time you come in. Everybody notices if you're one of the people that leave at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock. Everybody notices that just because you tell somebody to do something, don't assume that it's done. And that's the biggest mistake that we always make, is just because you ask somebody to do it, it's not done. It's easy to stick out there. And I tell young people this all the time if I'm talking to a group of young people that go to work for us, or if I'm speaking somewhere. It's easy to set yourself apart from everybody else, and that's what I tell everybody, regardless of they can have the greatest training or no training at all. And the person who wants to succeed out there, if God gave them the gifts, they're going to be the ones that succeed, regardless of how much training or education or anybody else. Because I'll show you some really, really smart people that have masters and doctorates that are working as waiters at some of my restaurants, where the guy telling them what to do barely got out of high school. Okay, so it's your leaders are leaders regardless of your education. It's who wants to be a leader.
All right.
I think training, in our company, training is probably more specific to the task at hand. You got an IT department, you got to have trained people in there. And so they've got to have a special regimen. We manufacture a sophisticated product that goes into your body. Those people got to be trained. Whether they're in the manufacturing process online, they got to know exactly what to do, when to do it, how to do it for safety and supply chain concerns. And then as you get up the corporate ranks, and maybe it's wrong, I'm thinking about this a little bit, because Dave, I wanted to ask you a question. Are you going to implement more training into your company?
Yes.
Okay, I mean, we don't do that much training at the higher level of executive ranks. It's very much like Tilman said, the leaders are going to stick out. You know, we expect people to have kind of 3 skill sets. A fraternal skill set, are they people who people want to work with? Is their attitude really good? Is their effort good? Technical skill sets. If you're a marketing person, can you market? If you're a sales guy, do you sell well? Do you manage well? If you're IT, legal, you know, whatever area you're in, do you have that skill set? Do you have fraternal? And then I look for gut, and that's what you're talking about. People who can see around corners, people who are natural leaders. That isn't going to get trained into anybody. That is just something that shows up, and you just go, boy, that she's got it, he's got it. Somebody, you know, they've got it, and the cream rises in that situation. That's a really tough thing to train.
And Susan, I would say that is in large measure the answer to the question that you asked me.
Exactly.
Because while we have formal mechanisms for identifying the leaders and the selection processes and so forth, I think it's the individual who stands above the rest, that has the trust and confidence of the organization, who can keep his or her cool under fire and has demonstrated that at whatever level they happen to operate, and the leadership says that's somebody that I think can operate at the next higher level and do so successfully.
So when you see someone like that, and I'll ask you this question to you as well, Wes. Here we are in a military service. We've got very formal selection and training processes, but there is still this gut level, there's still this natural leader piece. What do you then do to mentor those? And starting with Dave and then going to Wes.
Keep responsibility.
No, go ahead. Wes, we're going to you.
Well, first of all, I think organizations change over time. So when you have organizations that are under stress, there are a lot of people who can't handle those organizations. So a lot of my time in the military, when I was a battalion commander, we saw commanders who couldn't handle it. They couldn't get the inspections done. They couldn't get the vehicles repaired. They couldn't qualify the troops in tank gunnery. So it wasn't that you were dealing with, 20 people out there, all of whom were competent, and then you were saying who could be the best at the next level. So down low, what you've got is you've got people starting as captains. They have to get the mission done, and they can't always do that, and I think that's true even today. When you get to the lieutenant colonel level, you've got people, you're managing 500 people, you're managing 4 or 5 subordinate, 6 subordinate organizations, then you've got to work through those people to get all organizations working. The next higher level, you're dealing through, the mistakes are made 2, 3 levels below you. So you've got to anticipate the mistakes, you've got to correct for the mistakes, you've got to handle yourself in such a way that the mistakes aren't crippling. And then it gets, that's the way it goes up. So for us, I thought there wasn't that much informal.
Okay.
It was pretty formal. You got an annual efficiency report. It was a forced distribution system by your boss's boss. And what he said was, he was graded. So he couldn't put everybody as the best he'd ever seen. We used to do that.
With underlines.
Have 5 company commanders, they'd all be the best I've ever seen at this time. There'd always be some like at this time, and they do it one a month apart, But we got all that out of the system. So it's pretty tough. And yes, the boss's boss may look at you and figure out, does he have what it takes to work at the next level? But if you haven't performed at the top quality of the existing level of command, there's no getting around it. You're not going up. So if you were a brigade commander and your brigade of 2,000, 3,000 people didn't meet its performance objectives, if you couldn't handle a job, you could be the smartest guy in the room. It doesn't matter. You're not going to the next level. And at the 2-star level, there you're expected that everything's going to work right. But some people don't communicate that well. And above the 2-star level, there are no efficiency reports.
Right.
It's people. And there, it's more like it is in corporate America, I think, at the top. You pick who your CFO is because you're somebody you trust. And at the 4-star level, that's kind of the way it works in the armed forces. But below that, I didn't find you always had friends, but they couldn't influence really what was going to happen.
No, I think that's exactly right. And this idea of the efficiency report, the performance appraisal system, I think is something that has some real merit to it. I'm president of a very interesting company because we, in terms of our demographics and our human capital strategy, if we get people past the 2-year mark, whether they're engineers or program managers or business development or financial folks, doesn't make any difference. If we get them past the 2-year mark, they generally stay with the company 30 years. So we do the same thing that you were both talking about. We grow a lot of our talent from in-house, and that's a very, very powerful HR model to have. It gives you an awful lot of choice and a lot of experience and a lot of scar tissue that folks have accumulated in various capacities. And that's really worth its weight in gold. What needs to complement a system like that, in my view, is a way to evaluate your people that's very fair, but it also forces leaders to make tough decisions. So if you have 5 company commanders or have 5 program managers, who is the best one to be the director that I need to oversee the next set of operations. And so we've made this migration in my company now to a performance appraisal system that has forced distribution so that you can't put everybody at the top of the heap. You have a few at the top, more in the middle, and more down below. And then that gives the leaders then an opportunity to really evaluate their talent. And I think it adds some, a very positive and very robust framework to the selection process for picking your next generation of leaders.
All right, well, we just talked about the 4-star level. I want to turn it over here because, Michael, you're going through a transition at Herbalife.
Yes.
Part of the CEO, the president's, or the Admiral's responsibility is to identify those next leader, who comes in behind. Can you talk about how that's worked for Herbalife?
Well, I mean, he's sitting in the audience, so I'm going to be nothing but complimentary. But and nor would I be any otherwise. But we're blessed. We have, like Tilman was saying, and I think very much like the military is today, we've groomed a lot of our people for a long, long time. Rich Gudis, who's our next CEO, has been with the company 1 year behind me, 13 years in the company, and we've got to see his body of work. And so it was a real easy decision with the board of directors, because we sit down, I mean, the board's most important decision is deciding who the CEO is. I mean, that's job one. And then make sure the strategy and the vision behind that person is supported across the frontier of the company. And so what we did with Rich, and he's well aware of this, was to put him almost in a training program for the last 2 years to go out and make sure he built all of our operational side, handled our human resource side in the company, was a former CFO of the company, so he's got incredible talents, built an 800,000 square foot manufacturing facility in North Carolina. I mean, just in a global infrastructure. We never made a product until Rich came into this company, and now we self-manufacture 70% of our products across the frame, so of a $4.5 billion company, so it's a lot of product. And the only thing we had to do was introduce him a little more to the revenue side of the company, which he's become, you know, completely attuned to with our distributors, because our revenue is in the hands of independent contractors in the company. So we've been blessed. So he's had talent in multiple areas, brought in an incredible team of executives with him. We were basically, when we came into this company in 2003, we found a siloed company that needed to be completely rebuilt, and Rich brought in a great team from Rexall. I brought in a lot of folks from Disney. We used to call it D-Rex inside the company, a little kind of a acronym for us, and they blended incredibly well because of his skill set. So we're blessed, and you know, Rich has either the negative or the benefit of having me stick around as the chairman of the company. You can ask him later how he feels about that. But you know, so he's got kind of a built-in mentor, if you will, whether he wants to use me or not. That's his decision. But so we've taken the time to build an incredible team, and he's got an incredible team around him. So we're really, and it's a seamless transfer of power, and in the company, you don't see that. It's really interesting, and I don't know about the military, but you don't see that in companies very often, where it's that seamless. You see it once in a while. You see a lot of companies where, you know, the guy who's the CEO announces his successor, and then 3 months in shoots him, you know, and it's very weird. Egos, whatever. You see that more often, don't you, Tilman, than not. And it's amazing, you know, that guy just isn't ready to leave, or isn't ready to give it up, or doesn't want to give the private jet up, or, you know, whatever. And it's just like, I want to hang around for a while, but we don't have that, and he's a personal friend, he's a professional. We've had tough conversations, we have great conversations with each other, so it's a real trust factor that's there.
Well, we should get one other perspective on this. You recognize the negative stories here, Tilman. How do you identify that next the successors?
You know, I will say this, and I said this earlier, where I think the kids are a lot smarter, maybe today at an earlier age. There's still nothing like history.
Right.
And when there's, because I started the company, and I go back to, you know, one unit, and I've been around for everything, things just come up, and you just remember little things that happen with that particular business along the way. And it's got to be really hard for a leader to come in who hasn't been with a company for a while, because their learning curve, they might be really great up here at 30,000 feet, but there's no way they're going to understood what really ever happened at 5,000 and 10,000. unless it's a certain kind of a company. But when you are all over the place like we are, I think there's nothing like history. And so it's better for a company as people move up to the top. There's just nothing like people that have been there before and have moved around like y'all just did. So, and in the military, there's only one person who gets to all of a sudden get to the top, and that's the commander-in-chief. But everybody else has to work their way all the way up. And I assume that in the military, there's never a big jump. You go from one rank to the other. You never get to go from a colonel to a 2 or 3 star general. I assume you become a 1 star, or 2 star. Does anybody ever jump it?
Yeah, it's happened
But
once
not-
or twice. But the thing about it in the military is that the difference in levels of responsibility is enormous. The things that we ask captains and lieutenant colonels to do, I find in the business sector, that's what CEOs of companies do. They've got a budget, they've got a personnel officer with them, they've got to learn market intelligence, they have an S2 guy, they have somebody doing operations. That's done by people in their late 30s and early 40s. By the time you're a senior general, you're dealing with, when you're a 2-star, you may be in charge of the budget, let's say. You got to go over and work with congressional committees. You got to work with the Pentagon, with the civilians up there. You've got to project 5, 10, 15 years ahead, and you've got 200, 400 people working for you. And you're on a political calendar. So Congress decides they're not going to pass the budget. There's a continuing resolution. There's midnight phone calls. Everything is done after 6 p.m. on Friday. Everything bad. And then you spend Friday night and Saturday sorting it out.
Or the
in
day
budget.
before Christmas.
Am I right?
The day before
Wait,
Christmas
you
is the
were
other
in
day.
DOD. You did it
God's
at 6
people.
o'clock Friday night to us in the Army, and we had to work all weekend on it. I know how that
But then I worked for the Navy, so I got my own grief back at me.
But the point is that the jump in, a guy who was a 3-star was going to be a 4-star. He told me I wasn't a 4-star at the time. He said, "You're not going to believe if you ever make 4 stars," he said, "you're not going to believe the difference in the level of responsibility going from one level to the next." So it's a smooth jump in a way.
So what is it? What is the difference between a 3-star and a 4-star?
It all depends on the position. Let's say you're the 3-star and you're in charge of let's say the Army Acquisition Program. So you're dealing with, let's say, $50 billion worth of hardware research and development that's spread out over years 1 through 15, plus you're trying to buy spares for stuff that's 15 to 20 and 30 years old. You've got contracts, you've got contractors, you've got corporations like Lockheed and Boeing that come in and talk to you. And they're all going
Congressional
to...
districts.
Yeah, and congressional districts. And they're all going to bamboozle you. I was a colonel sitting with the Army Vice Chief once, and this was when we were first trying to develop a drone. This was 1983. It was a Lockheed Aquila. So the top guy from Lockheed comes in to meet with General Thurman. And this Lockheed Aquila, we thought it was pretty easy. The Israelis had done it. They had a model airplane that flew around with a TV camera in it and took pictures. How hard can that be? So this is a typical DOD program growth, right? So it starts out, it's going to cost $1 million. And then somebody says, wait a minute, you can't have that. You got to have 2 cameras, one that works at night. Okay, well, that's another $500,000. They said, well, how long do you want it to fly? Well, it was supposed to fly for 4 hours. Well, you put this extra weight on it. Now it only flies 2. So now you got to make the wings bigger, and you got to make the fuel tank larger. Well, now you need a bigger engine. So this thing, and then what about the communications? Don't you need secure communications, or is everybody going to get to see the pictures? Well, how does that get done? So this thing would go through a review process. Finally, Lockheed Martin CEO comes in to see General Thurman. He says, "General, I'm just here to tell you that we really love the Aquila program, and we're going to do the best we can for you." Thurman says, 4-star Vice Chief, he says, "Well, you're not doing good enough, and you're fired.
And
We don't want you. You're out. Program's dead." He killed it. And of course the guy was stunned. And naturally there were congressional repercussions, right? So, you know, people that were there said, well, you know, I've got employees and congressmen called and so that's it. We don't want this program. Now, making that kind of a decision is a tough decision. So when you see people that make that and you realize today we have the Predator, we have 10 other UAVs out there, but this was 34 years ago when we were getting started in this business. And this set us back by, I'd say, 6 years when we killed this thing.
Well, that's a happy note to end this session. If I may say, there's nothing
Remember
like
the
a
story?
good military procurement story to get you uplifted for the day. I do want to say, I want to thank very much Dave, Wes, Tilman, and Michael. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to spend time with all of you.
Thank you.
Dave,